The president-elect's cabinet picks prepare for the bright lights of Capitol Hill. Hi, I'm Elaine Quijano, and this is Red and Blue. Ahead on the program, a conversation with Senator Rand Paul about his new Obamacare replacement plan and his phone call with President-elect Trump, and a closer look at the legacy of President Obama. But first, the Trump transition enters the final stretch, and as inauguration nears, the president-elect is officially adding a new member to his team in the West Wing. Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, has been named senior advisor. Ivanka Trump's husband is said to be one of Trump's closest confidants, and that relationship will now carry to the White House. Meanwhile, Senate Republicans have jam-packed this week with confirmation hearings for the president-elect's cabinet. Attorney General-designate Senator Jeff Sessions will be the first on deck, followed by Homeland Security Secretary nominee, retired General John Kelly. The proceedings for Sessions will continue into Wednesday, when hearings for 4 more nominees, including Secretary of State pick Rex Tillerson, are slated to begin. And on Thursday, 4 more nominees, including Defense Secretary selection retired General James Mad Dog Mattis, will face questions from lawmakers. But Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer told our Nancy Cordes that the time frame of the hearings isn't practical.
There is no real chance to vet these nominees. Many of them are billionaires, many of them have huge financial interests, and there's tremendous potential conflict of interest. Not only are they rushing them through, but most of them haven't submitted their papers. You're supposed to submit papers that show what you own and then come up with a 90-day plan to divest. A large number of these nominees haven't even done that.
Democrat Richard Blumenthal agrees with Senate Minority Leader Schumer. The Connecticut senator tweeted Monday, quote, "No cabinet nominee should be considered without financial disclosure and background checks. I am calling for a timeout until necessary info is submitted." And the Democratic senator joins me now from Capitol Hill. Thanks so much for joining us, Senator.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, why does it matter whether nominees finish the financial disclosure and background check process before beginning their hearings?
The background check process by the FBI discloses things as simple as whether someone has been arrested, whether someone has made statements that may indicate extreme prejudice or bias or bigotry, what is in someone's past in terms of other conflicts of interest. And the financial disclosure form enables us to know what that person's dealings have been. You know, someone at a lower level, bureaucratic level in the federal government and a United States attorney, which I was for a while, would have to disclose these kinds of materials before they were ever even considered by the White House for an appointment. Here we have some of the most important public positions of trust and responsibility, and still we don't have basic information to use when we question them in a hearing.
Well, Senator, our Nancy Cordes spoke earlier with Senator Rand Paul. He says he's confident that all of the cabinet picks will be approved. Are there any nominees in particular that you would have reservations about?
I would have extraordinarily serious reservations about Tom Price, who has been nominated to be Secretary of Health and Human Services because of his extreme opposition to any form of health insurance, as well as his opposition to women's health care. I oppose Scott Pruitt because of his opposition to the mandate and mission of the Environmental Protection Agency, which he's been nominated to head. And I have serious concerns about Jeff Sessions. We'll have a hearing about him tomorrow, to be nominated as Attorney General of the United States. I served as a federal prosecutor, the United States Attorney of Connecticut, and I worked with the Department of Justice when I was Attorney General of the state of Connecticut. So I know this position. It is an extraordinarily important one, where the person serving as Attorney General has to be willing to stand up to the president and say, no, you're wrong, you're violating the law, and he has to be a champion of civil rights and liberties.
Well, Senator, you spent a lot of the day tweeting about Obamacare's impact on Connecticut. You said it's positive. Republican lawmakers plan to repeal it, but some are starting to raise concerns about repeal without a replacement. Is there any form of a replacement bill that you are willing to support?
I am more than willing to support improvements and repairs to the Affordable Care Act, which is by no means perfect. No major reform, including Social Security, ever was perfect the first time around. So yes, some kind of repair, improvement, but not complete repeal without any replacement, which would cause untold chaos, catastrophic costs, higher premiums, denial of coverage for people with pre-existing conditions or young people on their parents' insurance policy up to the age of 26. And of course, the prohibition against discrimination against women, charging them more simply because they are women for health insurance, would be lost as well. So these kinds of aspects of the Affordable Care Act are extremely important to preserve. I want to fix the cost to small businesses and the stability and flexibility of certain of the rules, but abolishing it, repealing it without a replacement, I think, is just wrong.
On another issue, Senator, we now know that the president-elect's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, will soon be named, or has been named, rather, senior advisor. Mr. Trump has called Kushner a tremendous asset. Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz has said that the move will raise some questions. What do you make of this choice?
It will raise questions in terms of potential conflicts of interest. He is very closely associated with at least one bank that's under investigation, criminal investigation, apparently, and reportedly. He also has continued real estate interests in New York and other parts of the world, the metropolitan region there. So there are going to be questions, and he's a special advisor, which means there is no Senate confirmation. But there will still be very serious inquiry about what his involvement may be in certain kinds of ongoing activities.
And lastly, Senator, another mass shooting just occurred on Friday, this time at the airport in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Authorities say the suspect bought the gun he used legally, but he also had a history of mental illness. Democrats were unable to pass comprehensive gun and mental health reform when they had the majority. And I wonder, will we see the gun control debate reignited soon?
It will be reignited, and I'm going to make sure that it continues to be ignited, because it is so profoundly important to save at least some of those 33,000 lives that are lost every year to gun violence. I come from Connecticut, where the Sandy Hook massacre reignited the debate some years ago, but it's not only Sandy Hook, it is Fort Lauderdale most recently, and the many other massacres and individual shootings that are preventable, senseless, avoidable with common sense measures like background checks or a ban on assault weapons and high capacity magazines and no fly, no buy. If you're too dangerous to board a plane as a terrorist on a watch list, you should be barred from buying or purchasing a gun. These kinds of common sense measures will come before us, I hope, again, and maybe be supported by Donald Trump, who should have every bit the same interest as President Obama did in preventing senseless gun violence.
All right, Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
President-elect Trump spoke with reporters Monday in the lobby of Trump Tower, but declined to answer questions about last week's intelligence report on Russian meddling in the election. Mr. Trump renewed his claim this weekend that the investigation was politically motivated. Here's what Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said about that.
I think he's worried about it undermining his legitimacy.
You think it's totally about, it's personal?
I really, because he said it's time to move on. Remember when he was asked about, I think maybe on New Year's Eve, let's just get on with our lives. You can't go on with your life as a democracy when a foreign entity is trying to compromise the election process. So, Mr. President-elect, it is very important that you show leadership here. Let me say this. If after having been briefed by our intelligence leaders, Donald Trump is still unsure as to what the Russians did, that would be incredibly unnerving to me because the evidence is overwhelming. All I'm asking him is to acknowledge that Russia interfered and push back. And it could be Iran next time. It could be China. It was Democrats today. It could be Republicans in the next election.
Congressman Adam Schiff is with us from Capitol Hill. He's a Democrat from California, and he's ranking member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Congressman, thanks for being with us.
It's my pleasure.
Let me start by asking you, Mr. Trump's incoming chief of staff, Reince Priebus, said he believes Mr. Trump accepts the findings of the intelligence community. Are you satisfied with that?
No, I'm not. The president-elect is not the least bit shy about expressing his views on Twitter or elsewhere. If the president really does accept the conclusions that the intelligence community has reached, he ought to say so, and he ought to say so in very plain terms, because we need to be able to work with him to fashion a response. And thus far, it's been a lot of deflection and denial, but not much acceptance of the reality.
Well, Mr. Trump says that he wants an improvement in U.S. relations with Russia. He said an improved relationship is a, quote, good thing, not a bad thing, end quote. Within the constraints of Mr. Trump wanting improved relations, what do you think he should do to push back on this election meddling?
Well, I think you ought to make it clear to the Kremlin that we won't stand for any further Russian interference in our elections. And we're going to push back tooth and nail, not only on what they did in our elections, but to make sure that they don't interfere in the German elections, the French elections, or those of our allies. And that we're going to also insist that they abide by the Minsk Accords in Ukraine, that they pull their people out of Ukraine and stop trying to destabilize the government there. And we're willing to work with them on counterterrorism in Syria and elsewhere, but that is not the same thing as bombing civilians. It's not merely about propping up the Assad regime. If they're interested in counterterror, we'll work with them. But here are where our interests lie, and we intend to pursue those vigorously.
Well, on that note, there may be bipartisan support among some lawmakers, but the New York Times talked to Trump supporters in 2 states and wrote about their opinions on hacking with this headline, quote, "What's the big deal?" end quote. What's your message to those who think that this doesn't really matter?
Well, and this was, a challenge that I think Democrats have to be circumspect, and that is in the election, the Republicans made full use of these hacked emails, and I think that was something they're going to have to accept a lot of blame and responsibility for. But Democrats failed to persuade the American people why they should care, and we still need to do that. We need to, frankly, forge a bipartisan consensus that no matter who it helps or hurts, we're not going to tolerate foreign meddling in our affairs. We want to decide our elections for ourselves, and we want our allies to be able to do the same for themselves without the propagation of fake news by a foreign power or the dumping and hacking of embarrassing material. So this is a real challenge to democracy. We had a free press here that was exploited, I think, by the Russians to publish this material often outside of its context, and that is going to have to change.
I want to go back to something you said just a moment ago, Congressman, about some Democrats not necessarily communicating the extent of the threat and the danger involved with the Russian hacking. How much responsibility do you think President Obama bears in not communicating early enough to the American people the extent of the Russian involvement with the hacking and also the danger that, in your view, other people's view, that poses to our democracy?
I think the administration does bear some responsibility for this. I think the president acknowledged that in a recent interview on ABC. But Senator Feinstein and I were urging back in September the administration to make a public case about what the Russians were trying to achieve in the election. We took the extraordinary step in advance of the intelligence community doing so about making public attribution. And I think it did come late. I also think the sanctions that were announced only after the election were something that should have been discussed with our European allies and implemented some time ago. I think that would have impressed upon the American people the seriousness of what was going on. The administration had obviously reservations about doing this. They didn't want to be perceived as putting their hand on the scale during the election. I think they were also worried about Russian escalation. But the result was, I think, that too few of the American people understood the seriousness of what the Russians were doing and how it was impacting our democracy.
And do you think the response by the Obama administration is a sufficient deterrent for future actions?
I think it's a good first step, and I don't think people should underestimate the significance of the mass expulsions that the president ordered. But it has to be viewed as just a first step. It won't be enough ultimately to deter the Russians. So that's why I think the additional sanctions that we're contemplating in Congress are so important.
All right. California Congressman Adam Schiff, thanks so much for your time, Congressman.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, President-elect Trump is applauding Fiat Chrysler for bringing more jobs to the U.S. auto industry. The industry giant announced that it will invest $1 billion expanding plants in Michigan and Ohio, creating 2,000 new jobs. The plants will produce 3 new models of Jeeps and be made capable of making a Ram pickup, which is currently produced in Mexico. President-elect Trump responded to the announcement on Twitter, writing, quote, "It's finally happening. Fiat Chrysler just announced plans to invest $1 billion in Michigan and Ohio plants, adding 2,000 jobs." He then mentioned Ford's recent plan to also expand in the U.S. and thanked both companies. Coming up, Senator Rand Paul says he's poised to unveil a replacement plan for Obamacare this week. Our Nancy Cortez spoke with the senator and has the details on his new bill and his phone call with President-elect Trump. Plus, the Obama economy. As he prepares to leave the White House, we'll take a deep dive into one of the signature issues the president has faced these past 8 years. You're watching Red and Blue. When President-elect Donald Trump takes the oath of office next week, he'll have majority support in both houses of Congress. One of the first orders of business for the new administration and Republican-led lawmakers is the repeal and replacement of the Affordable Care Act. Senator Rand Paul, a former eye doctor, tweeted Monday, "This week I'll unveil a replacement to Obamacare. As agreed with real Donald Trump, we must replace it with real market reforms." CBS News congressional correspondent Nancy Cortez spoke with Senator Paul earlier to learn the details about his forthcoming health care plan.
Senator, you have a plan of your own that you're going to release later this week. What's in it?
Well, I think we should replace Obamacare on the same day we repeal it, because our job should be to say, you know what, we're going to insure as many people as we can for the least amount of cost. So it has 2 or 3 different items. Number one, we're going to legalize the sale of inexpensive insurance. Under Obamacare, he limited what kind of insurance could be sold, and so you no longer had inexpensive insurance being sold, and as a consequence, young, healthy people didn't buy it, and as a consequence, you got what was called adverse selection, and insurance companies were failing and still are failing. So we're going to legalize inexpensive insurance, allow people to save, allow people to have health savings accounts, expand them. So you can put as much as you want in your health savings account to pay for, you know, diet programs, gym, vitamins, preventative health care, anything you want to pay for out of that. We'd also let you pay your insurance premiums out of your savings account. So legalize inexpensive insurance, let you save more for it. And then the final thing is, part of a problem with our insurance is if you're mom and pop and you have a pest control business, you're an insurance pool of 2. Who wants to buy insurance when there's only 2 of you? We're going to make it easier for you to associate with other people. And so there are things called association health plans where you can associate with people. If you could be, instead of 2 people, part of a group of 100,000, you now have leverage to get a lower price, but you also have leverage to get an insurance product that doesn't exclude you if you've been sick or if you get sick.
So you actually spoke with Donald Trump about this last week. What did he say?
He said he agrees. We ought to replace it the same day we repeal it. And as far as the details, his administration has said, show us your details. You know, show us the plan. And so we're talking with the Trump administration. This week we'll have a bill and we will get all the details to the Trump administration.
He has a lot of influence over Republicans in Congress right now.
I would say he does.
Yet most Republicans don't seem that interested in waiting for a replacement before they repeal. Why is that?
Well, I guess I would word it different. I don't want to wait for repeal. I want to speed up replacement. I want replacement to be there in 2 weeks. I want it to be there at exactly the same time. Many of these ideas that I've just presented to you are in bill form. They've been out there in bill form. We're essentially bringing together, collating ideas that have been percolating for years up here. In fact, Congressman Tom Price, who's been appointed to the cabinet, many of these ideas were his that he put into bill form. We're bringing them together, and I think it's a better idea to do replacement now rather than wait.
It's one thing to say that the ideas are out there, but you've seen lots of well-intentioned legislation go by the wayside because people couldn't agree on the details. Isn't it completely possible that if you repeal Obamacare without replacing it, Republicans may never be able to agree on some of the things that are in your plan and others?
And part of the problem is that if you repeal Obamacare without replacing it, Obamacare is spiraling out of control right now. Insurance premiums are going through the roof, and insurance companies are losing money. So you've got a major problem that's out there right now. You need to replace it. You can't just let it continue to spiral downwards.
It's also a deficit problem, isn't it, if you repeal without replacement?
Yeah, if you leave subsidies in place and take the taxes away, it becomes more top-heavy and adds to the debt.
You're on a number of committees that are holding confirmation hearings this week. How do you keep track of all these nominees when their hearings are coming back to back to back?
Well, my day-to-day schedule is a very busy schedule, and I actually do need help. So someone actually helps me in my office. We print out a new schedule every hour.
Right.
So, I mean,
but
it is a busy...
Are you able to prepare when you have so many people?
Absolutely. We've been preparing for weeks now for the confirmation hearings. And there's a few committees that I will be on where I'll get to directly ask questions. There's also committees where I'm not on the committee, but I am interested in questions, and we have submitted written questions. And we've also let them know we're not voting for them unless they answer the written questions. So we will try to drag answers out of all of the possible nominees.
Do you think that this Democratic concern that some of these nominees are coming up for their hearings before they've been fully vetted is a reasonable concern?
No, I think it's just, you know, they lost the election and they're unhappy about it. They're also unhappy because, see, they changed the rules to make it a simple majority, and so they know they're going to lose on every front. All of these nominees are going to be approved because we are in the majority and they're not. And so I think a lot of it's sour grapes. With President Obama, well, we didn't support most of what President Obama was for, but I think 7 of his nominees were approved on day 1. And so standards shouldn't change. They're wanting new rules for new vetting of these nominees that they didn't have under President Obama. How could that possibly be right?
So it sounds like you're saying most of these confirmations are kind of a foregone conclusion.
Well, no, they're important because we'll ask important questions. Even ones that I think I'm probably going to vote for, I'm going to try to get some public information from them on their positions so it's part of the record. And so it's part of, you know, you did say this, we expect you to behave in that way kind of thing. And so I think the hearings are very important, and we do learn something. And there's a possibility I would learn something that would change my mind on a vote. But I do tend to think that most of the nominees are going to go through, and if the Democrats force it to be a simple majority, they set the rules up that way. You know, they were in charge when they used the nuclear option to do it. So.
Got it. Thank you so much,
All right.
Senator.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And Nancy joins us now from Capitol Hill. Nancy, what struck you most about your interview with Senator Rand Paul?
Well, simply the fact, Elaine, that he seems determined to unveil a bill with a replacement for Obamacare this week. We all know what a complicated and massive piece of legislation the Affordable Care Act is. So the fact that he would actually be ready to present something to replace it as early as this week was pretty astounding. Now, obviously, we'll have to take a look at it and see how specific it really is and see if it addresses the various areas of health care that the Affordable Care Act does. But based on what he was saying in the interview, he does seem determined to address at least some of the major issues, including the fact that millions of Americans still don't have health insurance and that very often they can't afford it.
So he seems to be moving to a place of wanting a very quick replacement, but as you well know, not every Republican feels that there needs to be a replacement quite that fast. How does the senator get other GOP members to fall in line?
Well, first of all, it would help his cause a lot if he could really enlist the help of the president-elect. He said in that interview that he spoke to Mr. Trump and that Mr. Trump is on his side. But when Mr. Trump was asked about this at Trump Tower on Monday and was asked by reporters, hey, are you concerned that Congress might repeal the Obamacare law before it replaces it? He said, oh, I'm not worried about it. It'll all work out in the end. So that doesn't sound like a leader of the Republican Party putting a lot of pressure on his fellow Republicans to try to do what Rand Paul is proposing. And we've also seen the vice president-elect Mike Pence here on Capitol Hill, and he really hasn't been pushing that notion either. So it's really going to be up to Rand Paul, and with a small but growing number of Senate Republicans who believe for a variety of reasons that repealing without coming up with something to replace it or even having a replacement in the pipeline is a bad idea.
Well, Nancy, on another topic, we heard Senator Paul say he's confident that all of Mr. Trump's cabinet nominations will be approved. But for the viewers, which specific confirmation hearings are you going to be keeping your eye on and why?
You know, I'll be watching the first two hearings on Tuesday that are the nominee for Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and then retired General John Kelly, who's the nominee for the Department of Homeland Security, mostly to see what kind of stance Democrats plan to take in these confirmation hearings. How combative do they plan to be? How hard are they going to go after these nominees? That's really going to kind of, I think, set the tone for the week. The reality is that Rand Paul is right. Republicans have 52 senators, and because of changes to the rules that Democrats made when they were in charge, you only need a simple majority, 51 senators, in order to confirm any single nominee. So assuming that all Republicans hang together, and I think barring a major flub by one of these nominees, that's what you would see happen. These nominees are pretty much in the clear whether they get Democratic support or not.
Well, finally, Nancy, there are reports that while at the helm of Exxon, Secretary of State nominee Rex Tillerson cut deals with Iran, Syria, and Sudan. Those deals were conducted in 2003, 2004, and 2005. All three states were under U.S. sanctions as state sponsors of terrorism. How much could news like that, coupled with all the criticism Tillerson is already facing, impact his confirmation?
You know, he's got a very comfortable fallback position on questions like the one you just raised, which is that he's going to say, I was the leader of a large international organization, a big oil company. Of course, I'm going to do business with the states that produce oil and the states and the countries that produce oil. And if those are state sponsors of terrorism, well, it comes as no surprise to anyone that Sudan and Iran are producers of oil. And so what he's going to argue is that, look, I may not agree with what those countries do in other areas. I'm not a supporter of their governments. I am not friends with their leaders, but I'm a businessman and I was making a business decision on behalf of my company. That is an argument that seems to have made a lot of Republicans who were initially leery of Mr. Tillerson a little more comfortable. And even Democrats say that some of their concerns have been allayed as well. So I assume that that's the tack he'll continue to take in his confirmation hearings.
All right, we'll watch to see how it all unfolds. Congressional correspondent Nancy Court is on Capitol Hill. Nancy, thank you.
You're welcome, Elaine.
Up next, we'll take a look at the headlines that will give you a head start for Tuesday, including details on Ivanka Trump's plans once her father enters the White House. Plus, as he prepares to give his farewell speech to the nation, we'll discuss the achievements, struggles, and the legacy of President Obama. More Red and Blue after this. Here's a look at some of the headlines you'll be talking about Tuesday. The Washington Post says President-elect Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, will serve as a senior advisor to the president. Trump made the announcement Monday, and a lawyer assisting the family says Kushner's wife, Ivanka Trump, will not immediately be taking on a White House job. There are a number of Senate confirmation hearings scheduled for Tuesday, but as the Chicago Tribune reports, one of the most closely watched will be that of Senator Jeff Sessions. The Tribune writes that Senate Democrats will challenge Trump's pick for Attorney General because of his hardline stance on immigration and past civil rights record. And Time magazine reports Secretary of State John Kerry is formally apologizing for the State Department's past LGBT discrimination. In a statement released Monday, Kerry said, "On behalf of the department, I apologize to those who were impacted by the practices of the past and reaffirm the department's steadfast commitment to diversity and inclusion for all our employees, including members of the LGBTI community." President-elect Donald Trump's win in November surprised people across the nation and around the world. And now some Americans are still trying to make sense of how Mr. Trump defeated Hillary Clinton. CBS This Morning host Charlie Rose sat down with President Obama's Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, and asked why he thought the election went a different way.
We all just went through an election. He has said, as he said to the staff, and you spoke to the staff, you know, history zigs and zags.
Yes.
Why did it zag?
I'm least qualified to make any useful kind of political observations out of the election.
You were at the side of the most top political person in America, the President of the United States.
Yeah.
That is a political job.
It is a political job.
You can't be next to him and not understand what the dynamics of politics.
I understand them.
You
I
can't
also
help
know
him
that
get elected without doing that.
Well, there are a lot of people who helped him get elected.
Well,
least of all me. And if you had David Plouffe or Anita Dunn or
David
Alyssa
Axelrod
Mastromonaco or David Axelrod.
I've talked to every one of them.
Yeah.
So I'm asking you now.
I think the thing that we talked about at the top of this interview, Charlie, is something that we all believe to be true about the United States, which is to say that if you're working hard at school and you're kind of rolling up your sleeves and doing your homework, playing by the rules, you can get a shot here. Right? That was true for my parents. It was true for your parents. It's why my grandparents came here from Ireland, because they weren't getting that fair shot. And I think people feel right now that it's that basic bargain, that you play by the rules, you work hard, you're going to get a shot. They feel like the odds are stacked, the deck is stacked against them. And I think that's what informed a lot of the voting in the fall.
You can watch more of Charlie Rose's interview with White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough Tuesday on CBS This Morning. After 8 years in office, President Obama is set to give his final address to the nation Tuesday night. Thousands braved the cold in Chicago over the weekend for the chance to snag a ticket to President Obama's farewell speech. And even though he is still the president, historians are already looking ahead to the legacy he is leaving behind. The Associated Press broke down the subjects its journalists saw as the defining issues of the president's legacy, looking at him as the first social media president, his role in pop culture, LGBT rights, and what it meant to be the first African-American president. Economics writer for the Associated Press, Josh Boak, wrote about Obama's first task in office, putting the economy back together. He joins me now from Washington. So, Josh, out of everything President Obama has done in the past 8 years, what do you think will be his lasting impact?
One of the challenges is that his lasting impact will increasingly be defined by his successor, Donald J. Trump. When reporting on Obama's legacy, we found so many people who are complimentary of the work he might have done to help rescue the economy from a second Great Depression, and yet see voters decide to give all his efforts, whether that be Obamacare, whether that be the decrease in the unemployment rate, to someone who stood diametrically opposed to many of the principles and ideas with which he stood.
Well, looking ahead to his farewell address Tuesday, every president has given one since George Washington. What do you think President Obama will say?
The president will likely recap his many successes, how far the country has come, and it's easy to forget the dire circumstances our nation faced when Obama first took office. We were staring down the barrel of a second Great Depression. We had job losses on a monthly basis of 700,000 to 800,000, and now we have unemployment at a 9-year low. We have 20 million more Americans insured, and the president is likely to tout those successes. He's less likely to tout the challenges that many Americans still feel, whether that be a smaller percentage of them actually in the workforce, or whether they see costs for both child care, housing, education, and health care rising above their paychecks.
Well, I'm curious, when it comes to communicating the economic successes, Josh, how would you rate or how would you assess how it is that the president did in communicating whatever economic progress was made?
This was one of his fundamental challenges. When I talked to Obama's former advisors and current advisors, many of them said he was not someone who sought to play to the crowd, to use the bully pulpit, to whip out populist outrage when he could. These are things that Donald Trump has done very well as far as being that psychological president who can increase the animal spirits of the economy. And that created a challenge for Obama that he, in a sense, often played it so cool. The flip side is this, is that he got the United States through a tumultuous period with minimal drama, but that often came at a sacrifice. As his former Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner said, we saved the U.S. financial system, but we basically did it at the expense of the American public.
You touched on this. Back in September at the Congressional Black Caucus dinner, the president said it would be an insult to his legacy if people didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. Does President-elect Trump's win really threaten President Obama's legacy?
We'll see is the easy answer. We'll see what he does with Obamacare. There's debates about what it really means to repeal and replace, since we don't see exactly what's on the table. The flip side is this. Obama has a legacy, one of multiculturalism and pluralism and the meritocracy that's hard to reverse. Obama remains popular to this moment, with more than 50% of the country supporting him. And part of that is because of the symbol for what he is for the country. The literally winning of the meritocracy at a time that was very turbulent for race and economic and other relations in this country.
What about Michelle Obama? What will her legacy be?
Well, she stands as a first lady who was devoted to health and child nutrition, one who seemed to balance both the traditional first lady role and the career woman role that increasingly has become part of that office. The AP ran an extensive look at her background, and we've seen her as someone that the public increasingly admires and adores. Even Donald Trump complimented Michelle Obama after Melania met with her. And that seems to be a sharp turnaround from how she was initially perceived in 2008.
All right. Josh Boak from the Associated Press. Thanks so much, Josh. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And be sure to tune in Tuesday night for President Obama's farewell address. The president will speak from McCormick Place in Chicago, and his remarks are expected to include a message of gratitude to the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois for launching his political career. Our coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern with a special edition of Red and Blue, and the speech will follow at 9 p.m. Eastern. That's all Tuesday night, right here on CBSN. After the break, I'll get you caught up on the rest of the day's news, including the latest on the manhunt for a suspected cop killer in Florida, details on the alleged shooter, and the 17-year veteran gunned down in the line of duty just ahead. We'll see you back here again Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. You're watching CBSN.